Hi there. It's May the 20th, and we're coming towards the conclusion of our journey through 1 Samuel, which is part in the Hebrew structure of scriptures of the former prophets, the Nevi'im Rishonim, and we're looking here at chapters 26, 27, and 28. In chapter 26, the Ziphites, who have previously informed on David, tell King Saul that David is hiding in their area, and therefore Saul, still determined to kill David, even though he's repented of doing it earlier, he's still determined to get David, and so he comes and he camps in the area of Ziph. And while he's there at night, David and his bodyguard, his right-hand man Avishai, come and spy on the camp. They get right close in, and they're very bold, and they come right into the place where Saul is sleeping, and they see Saul asleep, and they creep in, and Avishai says, "Now's the moment. Let me finish off Saul. I can do it with one blow. It won't take two." And David says, "No. Far be it from me to touch the Lord's anointed." David will not raise his hand against the man who God has anointed as king, even though the Spirit's been taken from him. And so what they do instead is they take Saul's spear and his water jar, and they escape with it. And then David calls from a hill high up nearby, and he shouts down into the camp. And he first of all shouts to Avner, and Avner is Saul's bodyguard. And he says, "Avner, you've been sleeping on the job. You've not been looking after the king, and you deserve to die for this, because the king's life has been put in danger. Look here, I've got his spear and his water jar." And the King Saul then hears this, and he comes out, and he's very very tender towards David, and says, "Is that you, David, my son? Is that your voice? I recognize your voice, and oh, I'm so sorry I've done this, and how terrible, and I'm sorry I did it, and actually I see that you're going to be king after me." David isn't taken in by this, and the two separate, and they go their own ways. But David realizes that if he doesn't do something, if he doesn't move, Saul is going to kill him. And therefore David goes back to the land of the Philistines. He goes back to King Achish of Gath, where he's been before, and he appeals to Achish to let him have a city, to let him have a settlement in Philistia, and to allow him and his family, his wives and his people to settle there. And so Achish gives him the town of Ziklag in Philistia, and David settles there. Now Achish is actually taken in by David's story that he's actually against Saul and he's against the Jews. But what David is doing, in fact, with his men is he's attacking the pagan tribes that live around, and he's kind of going back to the days of Joshua when they were destroying the tribes that lived in the land. And he leaves no one to tell the tale of what's happened, but he tells Achish that he's actually going against Israel. And so Achish thinks, Israel is going to really be angry with David, and they won't want him. So actually he's now mine. I can use him in my battles. And in fact, at the beginning of chapter 28, the Philistines and the Israelites line up for battle together. And Achish actually says to David, "You're coming with me, and actually, David, I'm going to make you my personal bodyguard." And the story is left in suspension there as we go back to look at Saul. And Saul does something which really is the rock bottom of his sad story and his tragic story that is going to end badly. Samuel, before his death, has got rid of all of the occult practices in the land. He has got rid of those who have familiar spirits, of witches and of necromancers and mediums. But they're operating in secret, and so Saul asks for, and by the way, Saul has sought the Lord. He's trying to get an answer out of God. He's been and consulted the priests, and he's not got any answer from God about what he should do next. So he asks for a woman to be sought out, or he asks for a person to be sought out who can communicate with the dead. In Hebrew, it's a Ba'alat Ov, the mistress of a familiar spirit. And so they find this woman at Endor, and Saul goes to her in disguise, and he asks her to consult the dead for him. She, of course, says, "Wait a minute, Saul's prescribed this. Saul says this is against the law, and if we do this, I could die." But Saul nevertheless presses her and says, "No, call this person up for me." And then he asks for the Samuel to be called up. He asks to speak to Samuel, and then she realizes this is Saul in disguise who's come to her, and she's really afraid. But Saul says, "No harm will come to you." So she calls up what purports to be the apparition of Samuel, and he comes up, and Saul speaks to this apparition, but this apparition is not happy about being disturbed. And then Saul says, "Well, I didn't know what to do because I can't hear any other way." And this apparition that purports to be Samuel says to him, "Well, I said this is what is going to happen. I told you that the kingdom was taken out of your hand, and now you and your sons are going to die in the battle that is coming up with the Philistines." And then the apparition disappears. Saul is absolutely overwhelmed. He's not eaten for a while. He faints. He falls down. And the woman at Endor, who's been doing the calling up of the spirits for him, is actually concerned about him. Says, eat something, and he says, "No, I don't want to eat anything." But nevertheless, she makes them food. She makes them meat and unleavened bread. It's interesting. She makes matzot. It's that hurry thing, and there's something connected here about the matzot that the children of Israel ate in their days before they came out of Egypt. This is a matzot which is not going to lead to something good, made hurriedly in the night before Saul is going to face the Philistines in a tragic last battle. We see such a contrast here between Saul and David. We see David's determination not to harm Saul. We see his recognition of the Spirit of God having been on Saul, even though he's been withdrawn. And David acts with great integrity, while Saul continues to act in duplicity. And Saul actually is about to meet his end. We can depend on God when we act in integrity and when we walk with him, knowing that he's going to keep us safe through every circumstance, through every challenge, just as he kept David safe. Have a very good May the 20th.